In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to turn any simple object into a low-poly, game-ready textured asset. And I will use my favorite technique to build this realistic 3D model of a medieval oven. Now I thought I would start off by providing this disclaimer. The following Blender modeling method outlined in this tutorial is not the quickest or easiest approach for producing an effect like this. However, I tend to use this technique when working with rustic models and feel it yields the best results, especially when producing game-ready models. So I thought I would say that before I get bombarded in the comments section with people suggesting other methods. Okay, let's make a start by using the default cube. If you don't actually have one, then Control, then Shift A, Mesh, Cube, and we'll work on that. The dimensions look good. I think maybe the height needs adjusting a little. Let's try 2.7. Because I've adjusted the height here, I'm going to need to Control A and reset the scale. Always make sure your scale is on 111. Otherwise, it's going to mess things up when you come to texturing and adding various modifiers. I think maybe if I tap into edit mode with face select on, select the bottom face, Shift S, cursor to selected, tab out of edit mode, object, set origin, origin to 3D cursor. I like my origin point at the bottom of my model. And then I can set the location to 0, 0, 0. Scales all at 1, location 0, 0, 0. Perfect. Tab into edit mode. And just making sure the X, the red line, is running, let's say, from left to right. That's a good start. So we're forward facing. I'm going to produce an edge loop. Control R. Roll the mouse wheel forward once and left click. And then right click to confirm. And then Shift X and just push this out. And then another edge loop. This time on the outer edge here. Again, roll the mouse wheel forward, do it twice. Click, and rather than right-clicking, move the mouse down a little, perhaps like that. And I'm going to select the middle edge loop. I use Shift and Alt to select the entire loop, and then bevel, Control B, and expand that a fair amount. And I feel that these edge loops here both need moving apart a little more. So S for scale, Z, and let's just push those out like that. And maybe select all of the edge loops, G for grab, Z, pull that up a little. Now, if I select these two faces using the face select and extrude and pull inwards, to produce the inside of the oven and the log store. Maybe I'll grab and push that a little more on the Y to about there. And using the edge select, I'm going to select these two edges and Shift X and just pull those in a little. Like that. Now another edge loop, Control R. This is going to constitute the chimney, and then scale that on the Y just to push that out a little. Like that, and then select this face here using the face select, extrude upward to produce the chimney. Maybe I'll scale that down a little just to give it a little more form. The other thing I'm going to do is I'll select around these edges here, not the bottom, just the from here, around here, there. So that's those edges only. And maybe these ones while I'm at it as well. Oops. And then Control B to bevel. I know this is not the best way of beveling, but in this particular case, it's what I'm going to go for. And then while I'm still beveling, before I click on anything, I'm going to push forward the mouse wheel a couple of times, just to round that off. And I'll do the same with the chimney. I'm not adding loads of bevel in here, just small amounts. I've selected those outer edges, Control B, just a small amount. Tabbing out of edit mode. Now I'm going to save this before I go any further, so we don't want to lose what we've just done. So now we've finished the absolute basics for our model. let's right click, shade smooth. It's going to look a little ugly, that's okay. You could try shade auto if you prefer. And then moving over to sculpting mode, I normally change the setup a little so that we have a matte cap, which is brown. I just find it more visually appealing. And then let's remesh. I would suggest for a simple model like this, going for something like 0.008 on the voxel size, and then click on remesh. And we can inspect the quality of that remesh by going into wireframe mode, just to have a look. And we can see there's a lot of new geometry in there. So now that we've done that, going back into solid mode, let's start sculpting. So we're going to sculpt the large rocks first, the large stones that constitute the edges, maybe the edges of the oven, the plate that the oven sits on, and the edges of the actual structure itself. We use the draw tool for this. And there's lots of ways we could do this. We could use, for instance, geometry nodes. We could stick rocks on. We could do all sorts of different things. But I like this method. It does take a little longer, but I feel it produces more of an organic result. So, choosing the sculpt draw, I'm going to start by painting in the larger stones, which are going to be on the outer edges of the oven. I can use the parenthesis keys on my keyboard to increase and decrease the size of the brush. I can also do so here. See, I can increase and desize the radius. Make sure the strength is on 1 and that the plus is ticked. If I just bring this down to, say, about that size, and I'm going to paint a stone in. And I'm doing this all with one click of the mouse. I'm not taking my finger off the mouse. And then here, I'm going to stagger these two. So this one mostly is out-facing. The next one's going to be mostly in-facing. And I'll repeat the same over here. So again, a large out-facing one here and an in-facing one there. It can help just to outline it first, like I've just done there, so that you've got a guide to work along. If it all goes wrong, don't forget Ctrl Z to undo the last action. Now here, I think I might add one large stone in the middle, maybe even have it slightly tapered. Maybe I could cover that entire gap. Again, I'm just going to draw the outline first, like that. And then I'll start filling in. Now, I'm not convinced by the join here, the way these two rocks join together. So, I could use the crease tool. Just to give that a bit of a crease in between the two. You can do that with other areas, like here, for instance. Makes it look a little tighter. And then underneath the oven, I think I'll have something similar to this, but maybe not tapered, so less designy. And I will start maybe on the outside, just keep it parallel with this. I think I might smooth this bit down here. Give that bit of a beveled edge, perhaps, where people for years and years have been dragging metal trays in and out of the oven. That will do. And I'm going to repeat the same for the wood store. Right, I think that will do for the outer edges of the oven. Now the oven's going to have pretty much the same thing going on inside, maybe slightly smaller blocks. So maybe I can divide this into two areas for the oven and the wood store together. Same process. Maybe if I zoom in a little, try and get your camera angle right to begin with so that you don't have to move around mid-journey. You want to keep things as simple as possible. You don't want to take your finger off the mouse or pen off the pad at any point during the production of a stone. Now for the insides, this is going to be more brick shaped. So let me show you what I mean by that. Rather than it being large slabs of stone, it's going to be more like this. So there's one brick there and another brick here, and they're going to overlap each other. It's what we call teeing in the building trade. So just having things like this, and I'll show you what I mean by teeing in a second. Once I've finished this one brick, stone brick that is. Now can you see just here, there you can work out a letter T. See, when you put bricks together, let me show you over here, you don't do this with bricks. That's going to lead to a very unstable structure. Instead what you do is this. Each time you can see that T. So one stone lies across the edges of two and sort of overlaps at the center. That's what you should be aiming for when you do these stones, and later on when we put these pebbles in between our blocks. Now it's worth pointing out that a quicker way of doing all of this, achieving a very similar effect, would be to create a series of stone blocks, maybe adding a little bit of form to them using the sculpt tools in a similar way to the way we're adding texture and form to these blocks here, and then dropping them in on our model, teeing them up, and then remeshing so that it becomes one single object. And I know I'm going to get that in the comments, why didn't you use that method? But I thought this would be a really handy way of getting you into sculpting. I think also there are a few pitfalls with remeshing lots of objects together, like gaps form and all sorts of other things which you'll have to deal with later. So this method is perhaps a cleaner way, but it certainly is time consuming. I think that will do for the interior. Just a quick inspection to make sure I've covered everything. Yep, that'll do. Okay, I forgot to add a flue to the chimney during the recording of this tutorial. What can I say? I'm a Blender artist. I'm not a steeplejack or a brick mason. So don't be a clown like me. Add one. Control S, save. I'm going to turn my attention now to the chimney. I think the chimney is going to be a similar construction, large blocks of stone, and then finally after that, I'm going to cover this with pebbles. So now I'm going to continue to add blocks to the chimney and around the edges. I'll see you in a bit. So that's the chimney complete. I think that looks okay. I should have recessed that in, but I think maybe what I'll do is turn that over to the minus and just push it in like this. I'll probably just blacken the texture anyway, so it won't really go anywhere. There, that's it now. I think that will do. we're going to move on to pebbles now, which is going to be quite exciting. However, it's going to take a very long time to do. So I use a slightly larger brush. Start off with this little row here. Again, we're going to try and tee all of these pebbles in. And these are a lot easier to paint in, if you like, or sculpt in than the stonework, because it really is just a question of drawing circles, if you like. They're all going to be slightly different sizes from each other, but we are going to be teeing them. So every time you finish one, some can stand upright like this, a bit of an angle. I think it adds more interest when that is the case. But I'm aiming for that center point now with these stones. Don't want to be under pressure to always try and hide that line that's come through on the geometry. So I'm just going to use the smooth tool now just to break it up a little bit so that it doesn't come through and look unnatural. I'll do the same over here. Just break it up a little. That's better. Now, if I was using a texture for this or geometry nodes or whatever, I wouldn't have got that character captured in the stonework. So this is why I like this method. Anyway, let's carry on with the rest. And there we have it. There is our sculpted model. If you haven't done so recently, don't forget, save. So now we're going to move on to texturing our model. I'm going to use a texture that I've created myself, and I have this texture free to download. You can come and download it. It's only a 2K PBR, but that's absolutely fine. It's on 3dprintermarket.co.uk, and look for rough grey stone texture PBR material. And it will create a material like this. And this is the one I'm going to use for my oven. Come down to here, download free rough grey stone PBR material, and that will take you to Google Drive. And it's only 9 megabytes, so it's quite a small file. Let's go back to Blender. So let's go back to layout mode. And I'm going to put this on to the material viewport shading. Now, if you don't have a window here, just click in the top corner. You can see where the little crosshair appears. Click and drag to create a new viewport. And I'm going to change this one to the shader editor. So I'm going to hit N here to get rid of that so that we've got as much real estate for our shader as possible. And making sure that our object's selected, come down to the material properties and click new. And I'll give this a name. How about oven texture? Base. Now, if I really want to keep compliant, maybe I'm being lazy here, but I'm going to go back and put this as lowercase o underscore t underscore b. So we have that instead. Now, didn't really need to do that because we are going to remove this material later. We're going to bake this material into another material. A material that's going to be just pure PBR, just the diffuse, the smooth, the bump, the normal, which is more game ready. So we will be deleting this material later and replacing it with another. But it'd be a good idea to build this material up, which is going to be fairly complicated, and keep it anyway and just, use it on your future models. So without further ado, I'll start adding in the components for this material. Firstly, Shift A, S, Image, and choose Image Texture. We're going to put that here, and I'm going to link the color into base color, and then open. And from the texture that you're using, whether it's the one you've downloaded from my website or one that you've selected yourself, choose the diffuse. That's the version that has the color information in it. So you can see there, it's quite obvious which is the diffuse. I've even labeled it so. Now that's not looking too impressive at the moment. It's looking even worse than I could possibly imagine it would look. But that's okay, because we're going to come over here. I'm going to do a few things to this. If you have Node Wrangler enabled, you can do so in Preferences, Search, Node Wrangler. You can press Control T, and that will bring up mapping and texture coordinates. If not, you're going to have to add these in manually, and they'll connect to the vector. Make a few changes here. Object to vector, not UV to vector. And then flat needs to be changed to box. And then put this at, say, 0.5. So the blend becomes 0.5, and it basically does away with any seams. So you'll look at your entire model and you won't be able to see any join points. The textures that I produce are always seamless anyway. Without that, you'll see joins in your texture. So using object to vector and then changing flat to box and putting a blend in there, it'll make it seamless. There is a bit of a repeat going on. You see this white mark running throughout. So I'm going to decrease the scale. If I select all of these together and say 0.5 in there, there we go. That looks a lot better. So that's going to be the base for our texture. It's going to look very different by the time I've finished with it. There's going to be displacement. There's going to be ambient occlusion. That is where all the gaps are. It's going to be naturally darker, almost like you'd see patina in rocks. It's going to add a lot of extra to this. Also, I'm going to add into this material highlights on any of the protruding areas. So each one of these stones, for instance, will have a slight highlighted scuff, which will again add a bit of realism. All of this is going to be baked onto our low resolution version of this model, along with the normal and roughness or smoothness. So moving on, I'm just going to grab these and put these up here out of the way, maybe bring those down, because these are going to be used for other image textures that we bring into this. So let's start off with pointiness. We need to bring in a geometry node. I put that there, and you can see over here you've got pointiness. That's good. Now I'm going to add in a color ramp, and pointiness is going to connect to the factor in the color ramp. And maybe now is the time to click over to cycles mode. So coming over here to the render properties and changing the render engine to cycles, and GPU compute if it's available. So we get to see this as it would be if it was rendered in the cycles engine. It's a lot slower than Eevee. And coming over to color ramp, if I hold down Control and Shift and click on color ramp, you need Node Wrangler for this, by the way. So if you haven't got Node Wrangler, now's the time to install it. Can you see there? There's a slight shadiness to the darker areas. If I bring this up, can you see the ambient occlusions coming in? So the deeper areas are going to take on this depth, this darkness. The lighter areas, the areas which are further out, are going to be paler. That looks fine to me. If I want to come out of this preview, I'll just need to Shift Control click on the principal BSDF. We can't see a lot at the moment because we haven't connected our pointiness, our ambient occlusion, to the diffuse. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to link the two together. And the best way to achieve this is with Shift-A, S, and type in mix and choose mix from the mix, as it were. Now if I put that there and I change this to color, in later versions you would just use the mix shader and change float to color, and there if we change the mix here to multiply and connect the color into A, the diffuse into B, and then result into base color. Now can you see that the priority at the moment is with the pointiness? The pointiness is coming through more than the actual texture, so we need to swap these around. So I put the pointiness into B and the diffuse into A, it goes the other way around. Now I leave that on, say, 0.5, so multiply 0.5 like that, and then adjust this until it looks as I want it. Maybe if I jump back, Shift Control to the preview there, and just lighten that up so that we've got that starkness. Something, maybe, just got to find that bite point. How about that? So we've got the whiteness here, but we've also got the darkness in the appropriate places. Let's have a look to see if that has made much of a difference. If I put that down to 0 without, increase with. Yeah, I think that will do. We've got plenty of darkness going on, but there are still lighter areas. So if I put this on, say, 0.7 or something to that effect, you may need to experiment. You see, it has turned quite a lot of the rest of the stone dark. I think that will do for the time being. It's not massively obvious what's going on, but it will do. Also, I'm going to change the visual mode here. I'm going to switch off Scene World and maybe choose something from this here. Just makes it easier to see. You don't have to concentrate too much on the lighting then. And already that looks so much better just by getting the best lighting in. Let's move this over here. In fact, I grab all of this and this and move it over to here because we have not finished yet. I'm going to duplicate this and drop this in here, connecting between the diffuse over to the overlay, and I'll change this one to multiply, and I'll connect the color ramp to the factor. I'll move this over a little bit so we can see what's going on. The diffuse needs to be connected to the A if it's not already, and if I add in another node here, let's try a hue and saturation value. And I'll put that just down here in between these two. And I'll connect the color to the color and the color to B. So between diffuse, you've got hue and saturation, and multiply. Both of these are connected. Now let's add another node. And this one is going to be brightness and contrast. And I'm going to put that between hue and saturation and multiply. So if I just drop that in there, that's it. Now we can control both the hue and saturation and the brightness because we're going to focus on the highlights now. I put this on 0.5 and contrast on 1. So brightness on 0.5, contrast on 1. Maybe put the value here on the hue and saturation to 5. Saturation, say 1.5 or something to that effect. Hue, I'm going to keep this quite low, maybe 0.01, so that we make sure there's no colors coming through there. Can we see now we've got all of these almost white areas around the edges? It's looking far more realistic now. Now I'm just going to use an image texture for the roughness. So for that, if I just do an Shift A, S, image texture, let's just drop that in there like that. And connect color to roughness and open and choose the roughness or smoothness, whichever way around, making sure that color space, this is very important with non-diffuse texture files, always make sure the color space is set to non-color for a better result. And there we should get the correct level of smoothness or roughness, however you want to look at it, for this stone. All right, I'll move that up a little more. And let's finish with a little bit of displacement. So again, image, open up the displacement. If you have one, change color space to non-color. If I drag that directly to displacement and then add in a displacement and drop those in between to give some control. Now you can see not a lot's happening. That's because for this texture, going down to the texture tab down here, we need to come down to settings, and where it says bump only, Let's change that to bump and displacement. Now my model has gone a little mad. It seems to have inflated. That's not a problem. Firstly, we need to make sure that displacement is in height, not normal. And now it's become a large marshmallow. Not a problem. Put the scale down to something like 0.01. So it's very, very subtle. You might want to push it up a little more if you're feeling adventurous, but I think I'll keep mine at 0.01. So it's very, very mild. Now, very importantly, you're not going to get a true result from either of these two unless you plug this into the mapping node. So vector to vector for our smoothness, and vector to vector for our displacement. Now, if I zoom into the model, can you see I've got these lines? That is the displacement. The reason why they're lines is because we need to change flat to box on both of these, adding a blend of 0.5. And there we have it. If I exaggerate that displacement just to show you how it would look now that everything is properly lined up, we should see, yeah, that's a little too rough for my liking. I don't know how you feel about that. If that's the effect you're after, then go for it. But I think I'll go for something much smaller. There we have it. Now, I'm not going to get too concerned about how this looks now. I feel it is as I want it. So I'm going to give my GPU a rest and click over here to the viewport shading material preview. You do need cycles. You do need the cycles preview in order to see all of those finer points of ambient occlusion and all of the highlights that we've added in. But there we go. It's easier to work with, much lighter. So that's our texture sorted. We now have a good looking texture for our oven model. Now we're going to duplicate this model, massively simplify it, reducing its complexity, and then baking all of the high detail from the high resolution version of the model onto the lower resolution of the model, making this Blender asset completely game ready and low poly. Let's duplicate our model. Shift D on our selected model, and then left click. And you can see now we have these two in the scene collection. Now this is the original. We may have a copy beneath it. I'm going to call this one high res. And this one here I'm going to call low res. I mean, they're both exactly the same at the moment. There's no difference between the two, but I'm going to reduce the resolution of this model. And the way I'm going to do that, very simple. If I click on the modifier properties tab, go to add modifier and choose decimate. You could also use remesh. I prefer decimate because it tends to preserve detail where you really want the detail to be preserved, such as between the stones. But the large flat areas, it knocks that back as far as it possibly can. And the way to use decimate is using collapse. We go to ratio and reduce this to say 0.05. Now if I just hit enter, we should see that the face count has now reduced. It's now 1/10 of what it was before. And really I want to aim for a face count with a model like this, perhaps between 10 and 20,000, not 60,000. So if I keep on reducing this amount until it drops down to what I'm after, maybe a little more, maybe I could go for something like 0.018. I think I'll just take this down to 0.016. And that should do it. Let's have a look to see what that face count comes out at. 19,778. That will do. Now, if I apply that and then hide the high res, we can see how our model now looks. At this point, I think I might go over to shade smooth. And as you can appreciate from what you're seeing now, we've got a low resolution model. A lot of the detail has now disappeared. I go over to solid viewport, and you can see that we are dealing with a low resolution model. And to make it even more so, if I go over to wireframe, maybe switch X-ray off, yeah, that is low resolution. And don't forget, we're going to bake in all of that detail back into our low resolution model from the high resolution model, and you will be amazed on how much detail you can capture from texture files such as normal. The normal texture file, that's going to be the key here, and it's going to blow your mind the amount of information that it's going to keep in. So I'm going to hide high res, go back to the way it was a minute or two ago, and with my low res model, I'll go over to wireframe mode and tab into edit, and I will tidy this model up a little bit. For instance, the faces here we don't need. So if I just zoom in a little, hit C on the keyboard, making sure, of course, I'm in face select, and just select all of those bottom edges. Another way you can do this is go into one of the side views, whether it is the front or the right orthographic, either 1 on the keyboard or 2 on the keyboard. Let's hit the 1 here. Choose vertex select, go into X-ray and select those bottom vertexes like that, and then jump back into face select, and it should select a lot of that bottom. Sometimes if I just click off the X-ray for a second, it takes in a few bits that it shouldn't do, so it might be worth spending a bit of time deselecting faces that you really don't want to select. And my favorite method is by pressing the C on the keyboard, and pressing the mouse wheel will deselect. You may need to wiggle the viewport around a little so that you can see what you're dealing with. Hit X and delete faces, because we're now going to be unwrapping this model so that we can apply a baked texture to it, a completely unwrapped, seamless texture. In order to do that, we need to create seams. So if I start at the bottom here, and I'm going to hold down the control key on my keyboard and click, and I'm going to go around the edges of this model, so maybe around this front face and then around the back face and any areas of geometric significance. Now, just in case I deselect this by accident, I'm going to turn this into a seam before continuing on. Right click and choose Mark Seam. That's one seam done. And now I'll do all of the rest of them. Good, so I've inspected the model here. I can see that the seams are all in place. You will get a feel for where and when and why to add seams the more you practice. It is important to break your model up with seams so that the unwrapping process will deliver the best results. You won't end up with areas of low textural detail and high textural detail. Things balance out more when it's all broken up. I tend to put seams where there are natural seams, if you like, in the model, or folds. And when I'm doing so, I always think and how that's going to look as a flat area of image. So you could almost envisage seams as being boundaries too, pieces of paper that you cut out to stick onto a three-dimensional model. If any of your seams are incomplete, so let me just demonstrate that there. Can you see there that doesn't terminate where it should terminate? Then it will mess up when you are unwrapping this. You'll see that there are certain issues with the unwrap. In fact, maybe now is the time to unwrap with that break in the seam so you can see how that may look. If I go over to the UV editor, so I've changed from shader to UV editor, and then I come over to here and press A on my keyboard and U and unwrap, always go for the first one. See, it's unwrapped the model, it's done a reasonable job. But there are some strange things going on here. That is one individual shape there. And sometimes, although I can't see it in this particular instance, where there are vertexes overlying existing vertexes like that, and you should not be getting that. Everything should have its own space. So there's something a little strange going on here. And of course, the reason for it is this here. So if I go back over to this, select it, and mark seam, now that that's closed, select everything with A, unwrap, it has now alleviated that problem. Actually, it's very difficult to see because now that we've tweaked our seams and we've unwrapped it, it's all gone in a very different configuration, but that is looking a lot healthier. And one other thing I like to do, as soon as I unwrap something, I always like to go over to margin and just put this in at a more sensible rate, perhaps 0.01 rather than 0.001, and it'll increase the gap between each part of my unwrap. At this point, it's worth going through it carefully, making sure, again, that we don't have anything like this going on. We don't want to see geometry on top of other geometry. So just make sure, go through it. If you do see that, then your seams need investigating. Now that's actually quite a good unwrap. Sometimes you get everything all lumped up in one area, in which case sometimes shifting stuff around gives you the ability to increase the area that these objects cover. So imagine this square here is your texture. The larger these are, the more detail, the more concentration of detail they'll have. So I mean, I could try this. If I go over here to Island, so I can select each individual part, and I'm going to rotate with the R and press 90. I bring these down a little like that, squash them together a little. Same with this one. Rotate it. I may be able to get a little more out of this. And select all with the A, drag that into the center, and then scale with the S. Whichever method I use, I've got to make sure nothing is touching the edges or going over the edges. So now everything's unwrapped, I'm going to go back to the shader editor. And at the moment, this duplicated low resolution version of the model has the same material as the high resolution. So what I'll do is with the low resolution, I'll go over to the materials tab and I will remove this one altogether from the model. And I'll click on new. And we'll start with a new material. Now this is where we're going to name it, give it a proper name. So how about stone underscore model underscore texture. So anyone adopting this model will know instantly what we're dealing with here. And I'll come over to here and add in an image. That's Shift A, S, type in image, and I'll click on new. And in the name, I'm going to type in diffuse. The width, you can go for whatever you want. I'm going to go for 2048, which is 2K. The default is 1K. If you wanted to go to 4K, you could go for 4096 by 4096. Keep the width and the height equal and click on OK. I'll leave that as it is at the moment. And I always like to put the base color down to black to begin with. Maybe if we move over to the material preview, it's not looking great at the moment, but that's okay. I will duplicate this. Can you see here you've got the new image? Let's just click on that. And this one's going to be called smoothness or roughness. See there, the width and the height is the same. Keep the width and the height the same for all of these. Color space, non-color. Put that onto that. I'm going to duplicate this again. And this one, again, new image. I'll call this one normal. Same width and height again. That's good. So we've got diffuse, smoothness, and normal. Again, color space needs to be put onto non-color. In between these two, I'm going to add a normal map. And maybe I'll connect that onto there and this onto there. So color to color, normal to normal. And it's going to look very freaky because we don't actually have a normal map at the moment. So now we've got that, we're going to start our baking process. If I just select diffuse up here, that becomes the active texture. And then go over to render properties, making sure I've got cycles on and GPU compute if it's available. I'm going to go for the following settings. Under render, set your maximum samples to something like 8. Scrolling down to the light paths, I would set all of these from total to transparent to 2. Switch off caustics, reflective and refractive. Make sure that your performance, memory, tile size is the same as your texture size. And then under bake, if I just expand that, I'm going to choose from the bake type, diffuse, switching off direct and indirect contributions. And if I check selected to active and put an extrusion of something like 0.01, we're now good to bake. But in order to bake from the high res to the low res, we need to turn the high res model back on, select it, hold down the control key, select the low res, so both of them are selected. You must do it in that order. High res first, control, then low res. We're now ready to bake. This won't work if you haven't unwrapped your model, so you must unwrap your model. So click on bake, making sure diffuse is selected, and this will take a couple of seconds. Now while this is happening, I normally do something like this. I split my screen up here, and the top one I put on to image editor, and it should say diffuse by default. If not, go to the drop down and choose diffuse. And in that way, when your diffuse texture is generated, you'll get to see it, and you'll also get the opportunity to save it at the same time. Our texture is now baked. So first things first, go to image up here. So image, save as, and I think maybe just to be organized, because I am very organized, I'm going to create a folder, call it something like textures, go into that folder, making sure that my texture file is appropriately named, click save as image. Okay, let's move on to smoothness this time. So we click on smoothness, and then over here with the bake type, let's choose roughness, smoothness, roughness, hey ho, and click on bake. And there's the smoothness. That's looking about right to me. Save as, again, smoothness. Now you may have noticed I haven't attached any of these yet. I just want the dramatic effect at the very end. Let's get all of these textures in order. The diffuse, the smoothness, and the normal, and then we'll attach them one by one. Click on normal. Again, bake type. Change that to normal, and then click on bake. So let's go to image and save as, making sure it's appropriately named with all of the others. Save image. Now that we've done that, I think I'll just collapse that by clicking in the same place that I clicked to create it and drag upward. So we don't need that anymore. Let's just shrink that down a little. I'm going to hide the high res altogether. There we are. Already you can see something's going on here. If I just disconnect normal for a second and then reconnect it, can you see the level of detail that's being stored in this low resolution model via the normal map? Now, isn't that incredible? Before we connect the others, there's a few little points I want to address. I know what's going on here, and I want to fix them. Can you see there's these little black glossy points? It's not looking great. So if I go over to texture paint, and I can see already there's a few artifacts coming through where the baking process hasn't done the best job. So what I will do is, I always like to get rid of this window, just go back to here, making sure normal is selected from here, using the stamp tool and reducing the size of the stamp brush, holding down control, select from one area, dab onto another. Be very subtle with this. You don't want to damage all of that hard work. So just very gently remove these erroneous points. Okay, fair enough, that was actually a little more work than I was expecting with cleaning up the normal. Perhaps I should have gone back and played around with, if I can just show you, I'm just going to click on Save All Images here just to save the changes I've made to the normal map. If you get a result where the normal map's not quite as it should be, you could always come down to the selected to active and play with the extrusion amount. That can sometimes remedy it, but I wasn't in the mood to do so. I was in the mood to fix it manually, and I think I've done a reasonable job. There's a few bits left over. I could always go back into texture paint mode and change the viewport shading to material preview just to see if there's any bits that I've left out. Like here, for instance, there's a few little blobs which didn't quite come through on the first phase of editing. That sometimes happens, but you want it to be good. And I always like to spend a bit of time with the normal map because all of that attention I've applied to the detail here, I don't really want to lose it. If you keep on going over something and it doesn't seem to fix it, it could be an issue with the geometry itself. Something we're going to look at a little later on once we've finished with the texturing. I think that will do. Save all images. I'll put it back to the solid view. That's good. And going back to layout, let's finish this now. Let's connect those texture files up. So we've got the smoothness, or the roughness goes to the roughness, and the diffuse color goes to the base color. And there we have it. Look at this. We're not in cycles, but we're getting the ambient occlusion and pointiness coming through nicely. That's because that information is baked in. That will do. That's good. Yeah, there are a few issues with the geometry. If I just go over to solid shading here, you can see there are a few bits that are looking a little ugly. These black areas and strange looking triangles coming through. That's where the geometry isn't 100% right. So effectively you've got perhaps faces overlapping other faces. It's not looking great. So if I go back to sculpting and look at those areas, choose the smooth from the tool palette here, bringing the strength right down, I can just push those areas out until they look right. So then go over to texture paint and making sure that I've got a soft brush enabled, change that color to black and just paint that a little. See there, my strength is on 100 because this has got to be very black like that. Also, I could go over to the smoothness and with white, because I don't want this to be a glossy black, do I? I could just paint out the smoothness, making it effectively rough. Let's add a little bit of algae. So if I mix in a green here, let's make that a bit darker as well. Maybe like that. I'm going to change this to overlay. You might want to experiment. This is the blending mode. I'm making my brush a bit smaller. Strength, maybe something like 0.2. I'll just paint in areas like this. The areas where there's going to be a bit of rainfall affecting the levels of algae. That'll do. Save all images. Always do that when working in texture paint. Otherwise you'll be sorely disappointed next time you load up your model. So there we have it. There is our medieval stone oven, or whatever you want to call it. It's low resolution. And just to call up the stats here, just in case you're questioning what the resolution is, it's made up of 19,716 faces, or 9,973 vertices. Very low resolution for the amount of detail that's in there. But all that detail, which we manually put in there, slaved over, has been preserved in a normal map, a diffuse map, and a smoothness map. So there we go. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you like this model and you're looking at your own and thinking I still haven't quite got it, you can actually buy it. Have a look at the description below. You'll be able to download this model from my account at CG Trader. I'll see you next time.